Brittle rock, we'll see this again later. You can see that rock has failed, broken up, a lot of fluid gone through it. This rock hasn't been veined, it's too ductile. It's too soft or too ductile. If we have a look at close up of one of these veins, there's the quartz vein, there's this extreme alteration, which is quartz, sericite and carbonate, a very strong front of alteration, and then outside here this is just chlorite and calcite. So if we put some acid on here, this would all fizz, a lot of calcite in it. This is anchorite or dolomite, it won't fizz, but we've got carbonate in here, and then silica. And then as we go further away and we look at this in detail, we find all these strange minerals here, these minerals like this. This is all a mineral leucoxene. This rock was full of ilmenite, and the ore fluid has altered the ilmenite, which is iron titanium oxide, just to titanium oxide, and often you can follow this for hundreds of metres away from the obvious alteration. This is a tonalite at a place called Granny. These deposits in Australia have very strange names. So Granny Smith is a type of apple. So all the deposits are called apples. In other places they're all called beeches. Another place we'll see they're all part of Nelson's fleet, the British fleet that defeated the French in
I don't know.
yeah, I'll remember. Someone will know the history of the no, it's Waterloo was the other one. Trafalgar, sorry, Battle of Trafalgar. So Australians have funny ways of naming deposits. We can see here is an igneous rock. This is a tonalite. Here is the altered rock, so something which was hornblende, plagioclase quartz is now totally altered to sericite, bleached to sericite carbonate quartz. You see all the little cracks, like the fluids come in under very high pressure, it's cracked this rock, broken it up, and then all the fluid has come along these cracks and totally altered the rock and produced a very, very bleached rock. This is typical of gold deposits of this type that formed at very high crustal levels. This is a small-scale example of the Golden Mile. This is just something I saw underground, which was a small-scale replica. So a typical gold deposit of this type would have a shear zone. You can see strong foliation in here, lots of little quartz veins, and so on. Then we've got that alteration zone, very sharp. This is the dolomite or anchorite, which is an iron carbonate, and sericite, and then we've got essentially undeformed rocks out here. This is dolerite again here. Same thing on this side in here. So if we were looking at an ore deposit from Kalgoorlie, this would normally be a few metres across. This would have gone 2 ounces of gold per tonne or something like that, very high grade. And then the alteration halo would go 2 grams per tonne. And in the modern open pit at Kalgoorlie, we imagine this is 2 kilometres across. Now, something like 2 kilometres, they would mine all this and they'd take all this alteration, and all the rich stuff would have been taken out in underground before the open pit started. And here's what the foliation looks like. We looked a little bit in there. Foliation, little quartz veins, pyrite, and so on through here. And if we looked at this pyrite under a microscope, we'd see, although the rock is very, very, very strongly deformed, the pyrites are almost undeformed. So that means the gold is associated with them. They're forming very, very late. So all these shear zones were mostly already shear zones before the ore fluid came through and produced the alteration and the pyrite in here. There's a very good example of a front. This is a banded iron formation here. You can see that the magnetite is that layer, then the darker layers are the quartz in this case. So the magnetite is there. You can see this front of alteration, that's replacing the magnetite. This is all pyrrhotite and pyrite down here. And this is gold, so this stuff here would go 10 grams per tonne. That material there would be 10 parts per billion. So 1,000 times less than this. And so this is what we see as a front. These banded iron formation deposits. So the banded iron formation is here. They're often where we get these cross faults. I'll talk about intersections later on between structures. So they're occurring at those intersections. But we can also see the blue ones are hosted by basalt. These are hosted by cherts. They're just part of a series of deposits all forming in this anticline. This big anticline here, cut by these faults. And so intense when we, in the 1980s, when the syngenetic model was very popular, particularly in Canada, I went to a conference and showed this example. It was quite interesting. I actually went to Canada and the survey there, the survey had asked me would I do a day's consulting with them and discuss their projects. And they've been drilling a banded iron formation as a stratigraphic unit, looking for facies changes and so on. And I gave a talk on structurally controlled, said why don't you drill in the anticlinal hinge, all the normal things that you might think of today. And the first drill hole they drilled this. So they cut a slab of the core and presented it to me. So I thought this is wonderful because, you know, I can show this around the world as a beautiful example of we've changed an exploration program, we've drilled a hole, we've hit some gold they didn't hit before, and it's got a wonderful front in it. And everywhere I went, people accused me of gluing bits together. So they said I glued this to this and this to this. So intense was the argument that they thought I glued this together to make this. It wasn't actually natural. So it was quite an interesting example. But to me, it showed the power of the structural model. Yeah. We did a study here. When I started this in the early 80s, we did a study at Water Tank Hill here. We've just discovered, and my students found exactly this. And we did it for a company called Western Mining Corporation. Their chief geologist, a very famous geologist called Roy Woodall, but they believed in the syngenetic model. And Roy Woodall discovered the bauxite deposits of Western Australia, which are worth billions. He discovered the Kambalda nickel field, which is worth billions. And he discovered Olympic Dam, iron oxide, copper, gold, which is worth trillions of dollars. So the one man did all this. And I was very proud because we had a student here, just a fourth-year student. He flew us all up to Kalgoorlie to present our information to him. He stood up and said this was the best work he'd seen for years. Then he took me into a room and he said, we're not funding you for 5 years, David, because we want to keep this to ourselves. So luckily for me, I was able to negotiate. He gave me a 3-year postdoc, doctoral fellow, which turned out to be Neil Phillips I got, to come and work at Kalgoorlie in exchange for not doing anything and not publishing anything in this area. But it changed their whole exploration program, and they were very successful after it. So it shows that genetic models sometimes actually are useful. They change the whole way we think. At Gaeta, I don't know if you remember, but the UNESCO had a big program at Gaeta, and the guy there was a German geologist. He believed it was syngenetic, and I don't think they even hit the banded iron formation, did they, in their drilling?
Not until much later.
No, not until much later. They just had completely the wrong geological model entirely.
All structurally controlled.
It was all structurally controlled. He didn't believe it, the guy who was there. I actually met him in 1987, and he didn't believe it. They didn't hit anything. And here was the biggest gold deposit in